it's birthing season, which is super exciting. It's still cold outside. I'm beginning to see very common question. There are people who are now having weak kids. It happens. It just is, it's a part of the birthing season. We've only had it happen twice in 3 years, but I've had two others who wound up kind of close. So I wanted, which we avoided going into weak kid because of some things that I've learned over that period of time. So I want to try and be concise, but I want to also try and provide things that have made our lives easier and their outcomes better as we treated these things. So it will be a slightly longer video just to try and get into those details, but to save viewers and this video some time, I want to start by saying probably one of the worst things that can happen when you have a weak kid is that they turn floppy. That's a lot more detail. And there's some really, really finite things to know and understand about that. So what I will say is I wish before I'd ever started with goats that I had found Tennessee meat goats, and particularly they have an article on weak versus floppy kids. It's something I now reread before birthing seasons. There are a handful of things that I cover again at the beginning of birthing seasons because we're only 3 years in, so this is not all of it is 100% concrete. You're not going to experience everything in a season, thank God. I didn't have a malpositioned birth till my third birthing season, for example. So I read birthing position information before every single season. But that article, Tennessee meat goat weak versus floppy kid, I wish I had had before our first season. I also wish I had realized that full-term litters can still have a preemie kid, because I did not know that, and so I wasn't prepared. Now I know I've had that happen, and in that first year, we had a weak kid who was preemie that we lost because she went floppy. So I'm going to share that article to begin with because she wouldn't have gone floppy had I known those things. But I'm going to share the better because in our second season we had a very, very good outcome with a kid who went a little weak. The first thing I'm going to say is that those kids who come out preemie in full-term litters, you're going to notice that they're a runt. And that said, though, our little guy, Anova, he was not significantly smaller than his litter. He was just the smallest, but not so much so that it was immediately alarming. He did not stand quite as quickly. He wasn't quite as active, and he didn't nurse quite as well. All of these are signs that, something's not 100%. So anytime I see anything like that, I check for teeth. They only have bottom. That's all you need to check for. If the teeth haven't ruptured, you have a premature kid. Even if, and he was 150 days pregnancy. So you want to know that, especially this time of year. It's January right now, and some people's birthing seasons are starting. If your kid is delivering in the middle of summer, this isn't going to be, in the middle of spring. Summer, they can overheat. Winter, obviously, they can go hypothermic. If you have a preemie, they don't thermoregulate properly. So you don't necessarily need to pull them off their dam immediately if you run a dam-raised program, but you want to be very aware of that kid. Any kid that looks a little slower than their litter mates, I give a bottle of their own dam's colostrum. Their dam won't reject them as long as it still smells like them. So they'll let you bottle supplement kids. They don't mind. If there's one that's just not getting quite as much and is smaller and is, not keeping up, I give them a bottle immediately. And that's a huge part of preparing for if anything else goes wrong. I don't give much. I literally give a few cc's. I'm not actually trying to supplement the dam's feedings. What I'm doing is pre-planning. If there's a problem, they'll take a bottle, because some kids are going to act like you're trying to kill them when you give them a bottle. Some kids don't mind, but they don't get it. Others take to it pretty darn quick, but it's super individual. And if it comes to a weak kid, you don't want to suddenly realize that this kid that's weak is one of those that's going to struggle like you're trying to murder him with a bottle. So if there's anything slightly off at all, or even if I just have a really large litter, I give them a little bit of their own Dam's colostrum by bottle for a little bit, first couple days, so that I know for sure that they'll take a bottle in case of an emergency. That's preventative tip 1 and 2. Check the gums. Give bottle if you have any concern that something's off. Again, you don't have to go bottle raise just because of that. Preventative 3, we keep a really close watch on those kids, both by going out frequently and on the baby monitor. I will be looking at them just before bed, and we have the kind that you can swivel around, and I'm looking for that kid, or those kids that I'm a little concerned about, and I'm wanting to see, are they nursing? You won't necessarily see every single time, but if I see them upstanding nursing a couple times a day, and their weight looks good and their energy looks good, I'll keep them with their Dam. I had one by day 2 or 3. It's not always on day 1 that something's amiss. I realized he just wasn't quite getting enough. So I brought him in on a hunch, and his temperature was 98. So, 2 most critical things if you have a weak kid. Hypothermia is a pretty good sign that they're probably weak, especially in his case where the gums, checked his gums again, and I'm like, dude, you still don't have all your teeth. He had 2 out of the 4. So both of those, at that point, I checked his suckle. So that's your next step. Put your finger back in their mouth and see, do they suckle? If they suckle, that's great, because you can give them a bottle. If they don't suckle, we use 1 cc syringes, and we'll give them drops. If they're super weak, you might need to massage right under the jaw. And if they're super weak, molasses, just a tiny, tiny bit on your finger around their gums, can help stimulate them and wake them up before you give the bottle. If you have to bottle feed, be 100% certain they're sternal. I do that by putting them between my knees. So they are between, not my knees, between my legs, with their front legs, like Superman, over my knees. And then I give them the bottle in front of me. You always have to check for temperature. However, there's an exception. There's always an exception, right? We found, because he was cold, we put him in the precision cooker with a Ziploc bag in Superman, because that kept the bag from restricting his airway. And with his feet out like Superman, I'd hold it behind and just suspend him in the water. It would take 10 minutes for the bottle to warm up to 102, and by that time he was 102. So that was such... I have something in my throat. Sorry. That wasn't me going teary. I had something in my throat. I preferred that 10-1 over doing a rectal temperature every single time, because they are literally so small that even our thermometers aren't big, and it was not super easy to get the temp from them. So I still got his temperature once a day. But if I were the goat kid in that situation, I'd rather have a spa than a thermometer up my butt. So, anyway, that was a huge help for us, and I greatly preferred that to the method of the blow dryer over the bin that some people use. It's a good method and it works. So if what you have is the blow dryer, grab it. I'm just saying, if you have a precision cooker, it was easier because it warmed the bottle and the kid to the precise temperature, and I didn't have to add the step of checking his temperature. I did the first couple times because I was concerned. I wanted to make sure that it was bringing his internal temperature up. But once I established, yeah, I got him at 102, and that was consistent. So again, first few feedings, I was checking that. After that, I grew to trust that the 10 minutes it took to warm the bottle was also warming him, and he loved it. So it was not inconvenient. I, between feedings, would put him in a laundry basket with a heated pad and a puppy pad to keep the heated pad safe. But with those methods, he was back to taking a bottle by 2 days old, and he was running around our house by 2 days old. So, 2 days post, that was 4 days old for him, 2 days after we'd had to pull him out of the barn. I think even if the kid was latching well, if their teeth weren't through the gums in the middle of winter, I would probably still bring them inside and put them in the basket. Not every dam is gonna reject them at that stage. If you use their own dam's milk, lots of those dams will gladly take those kids back. I have had one or two kids I needed to bring in, and I needed to supplement them a bit because I realized they just weren't competing effectively with significantly larger siblings. And I bring them in, give them a little bit of TLC and take them back out. As long as I've used their own dam's milk, they're fine. They'll take them back. But you want to be really watchful at that stage because dams are substantially more likely to reject those kids. The last thing I thought might be helpful, there was a conversation in one of these threads when somebody asked, another keeper said check FAMACHA, and somebody responded, but FAMACHA isn't used in kids. And they're both right. They're both right. Because you don't use FAMACHA for parasite control in kids until it's about 6 weeks old. We start checking them. I forget the exact time frame because we start checking their FAMACHA around 3 weeks old ourselves. That is just because at 19 to 21 days, I give Toltrazuril for coccidia prevention. It's the only preventative parasite control I give. I do vaccinate for CD&T, but I don't do any deworming preventatively. I always do that in response to fecal egg counts or low FAMACHA, except for the coccidia. So since I give that at 19 to 21 days, I go ahead and start checking their FAMACHA. They're not going to show for barber pole at that point. The point of that is to get them used to me doing that, and I have a baseline. I always like baselines. So if I have a baseline, I'm like, oh yeah, well, she tends to run a little low. Not, if anemic is anemic, but some of my goats will sit at absolute perfection and some of them will be, I always get the scale reversed, but at any rate, some of them will be near perfect all the time and some of them will be one down from that all the time. I apologize because like I said, I tend to get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and I'll find myself reversing anyway. They're both right though, because you can't get a blood pressure or pulse ox on a kid that small. We have Nigerian dwarves, but honestly, even on a full-size goat kid, I can't think of a blood pressure cuff that's the right size for them, because even a a human newborn, I suppose if you could find a cuff to measure blood pressure on a baby, premature human baby, that might fit goat kids, but I don't even know where you'd get one of those. So, FAMACHA at that stage, if you have a kid who's already weak, that is a helpful measure because what it tells you is circulation at that stage. It's not a mark of anemia in a newborn, and it is not an indicator of Barber pole or any other parasites because they're not born with any of those. And even if they picked them up the day they hit the ground, which they're not going to because they're not, it's not happening. But you can still use that because in a human we would check for pulse ox and blood pressure for the sake of understanding how well the circulation system is working. We don't have an easy way of that with the goat kids. So your FAMACHA score at that point will tell you if there's a circulation issue, which again can go with hypothermia. I hope that that's helpful. I hope that that covers it all. I hope I didn't bore anybody. I'm sorry if I did. Feedback, welcome. Also, please share personal experiences because we're just in year 3. So, like I said, I didn't even see my first malpositioned kid until the 3rd birthing season. I'm in year 4. Time flies. But it's 10 years to mastery, so I'm not sharing this as a be-all, just that a be-all or end-all video on this topic because I don't know all of it, and so I would love more experienced keepers, or I would absolutely love comments, with information and feedback. But in 3 years we have picked up some stuff, so I thought that it might be helpful.